pause for a moment and listen carefully to what Lebanon's Prime Minister is saying, because what is being presented as state authority is in reality a dangerous political fantasy. Nawaf Salam tells us that the first phase of restricting weapons south of the Litani River is almost complete, and that the state is ready to move north of the Litani next. He says this calmly, confidently, as if Lebanon were a sovereign island floating outside history, geography, and even reality. But here's the inconvenient truth. This talk is not only reckless, it is illegal, disrespectful to a large segment of the Lebanese people, and catastrophically damaging to what remains of internal stability. First, the facts. United Nations Resolution 1701 speaks specifically about arrangements south of the Litani River within a defined context following Israeli entity aggression. It does not give any Lebanese Prime Minister a blank check to announce a nationwide disarmament campaign, nor does it authorize transforming the Lebanese army into an internal enforcer of political vendettas dictated by foreigners and ambassadors. Second, this language is not neutral. It is not technocratic. It is not state building. It is provocation. When a prime minister speaks about restricting weapons without mentioning Israeli entity aggression and violations, daily airspace breaches, occupied Lebanese land, or the complete failure of international guarantees, he is not strengthening the state. He is stripping it of legitimacy. A state does not assert authority by selectively disarming those who deter an external enemy while offering speeches and condolences as its only defense doctrine. And let's be brutally honest here. This plan is not applicable. It never was. Anyone who understands Lebanon's social fabric knows that attempting to forcibly impose such a project north of the Litani is not governance. It is an invitation to internal collapse. You do not build a state by pretending one part of the population does not exist, or by threatening the very balance that prevented Lebanon from imploding for decades. The real tragedy is this. Politicians like Nawaf Salam speak as if Lebanon were a classroom and they were lecturing disobedient students. But this is not theory. Resistance was not born out of ideology. It was born out of necessity, abandonment, and invasion. And until the state proves practically, not rhetorically, that it can protect Lebanon, defend its borders, and deter aggression, this kind of talk will remain exactly what it is: delusional posturing paid for by Lebanese stability. Welcome to the Mideaststream. I'm Marwa Osman. Lebanon's Prime Minister Nawaf Salam speaks of phases, plans, and state authority as if the country were a laboratory experiment rather than a fragile political ecosystem shaped by war, deterrence, and external aggression. In this segment, we examine why this language is not only disconnected from reality, but potentially explosive in a country where security has never been protected by words alone. To discuss this issue with us from Beirut is retired Brigadier General Baha Halal, military expert and strategist. It's a pleasure having you with us, General. Now, why is the Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam attempting to impose a poorly, if any, defined security model without neutralizing external threats before he starts speaking about other things? And how does this strategy risk exacerbating internal stability in Lebanon?
تحياتي دكتورة وصباح الخير.
Greetings, Doctor, and good morning. In truth, the imposition of an ambiguous security model has underlying causes and motivations. I see external pressure as the primary driver of this approach. Prime Minister Nawaf Salam appears to be presenting himself as a conciliator between internal forces, namely the resistance and those opposed to it, while at the same time operating under American, French, and Gulf pressure. I believe he is pursuing what might be described as an escape from genuine crisis management. He manages the crisis without offering real solutions to Lebanon's deep-rooted structural threats. This form of crisis management ultimately serves to appease the so-called international community. His current discourse on security reform, or the imposition of a vague security model, is designed to satisfy external actors, with the aim of preserving continued international support for building a security apparatus. However, the ambiguity of this security model leads to a failure to clearly define external threats, effectively leaving Lebanon an open arena for foreign intervention in practice. This has serious repercussions for stability, as the absence of clarity and direction deepens mistrust and amplifies fear among the various components of Lebanese society. As such, this model cannot constitute a solution in the absence of a comprehensive national vision, specifically an integrated national security doctrine. What is required is a full national security strategy that draws on Lebanon's existing sources of strength, foremost among them the resistance, which has established a deterrent against the Israeli enemy from 2000 through 2024.
الإسرائيلي انطلاقا من عام 2000 حتى عام 24.
Well, what would you actually think would happen on the ground, Brigadier General, if the Lebanese army were pushed, maybe politically, maybe operationally, into a confrontation with the resistance northern part of the Litani, as the Prime Minister is saying, given that Zionist Israel's ongoing violations and Lebanon's unresolved defense has gaps in it?
سيدتي الكريمة، عمليا هناك في الواقع ضغوط خارجية.
Madam, in practical terms, there are indeed immense external pressures, whether American or Western, exercised through intermediaries, as well as intense Israeli anti-military pressure driving this issue. The primary objective is to weaken the resistance by setting Lebanon's internal components against one another, specifically by provoking a confrontation between the resistance and the Lebanese army. Zionist Israel is exerting every possible effort, using all the means at its disposal, to push matters towards a direct clash between the resistance and the Lebanese army. Such a scenario would spare it the cost of a direct war. From Zionist Israel's perspective, internal strife between the two would be far less costly in terms of losses. This is precisely why it seeks to avoid a direct confrontation, an option it has already tested, particularly in ground warfare. Internally, however, the equation is different. Neither the army nor the resistance is inclined towards such a scenario. The Lebanese army has a doctrine, and its leadership has consistently demonstrated wisdom in both conduct and decision-making. It rejected this path in the aftermath of the two well-known government decisions and managed, so to speak, to smooth the edges, ultimately leading to what we now know as the army's current plan. The central question, then, is whether the Israeli project, alongside the external American project, can succeed. Thus far, there is no indication, in my view, that such a project is succeeding. This is because both the army and the resistance fully grasp the danger of this trajectory. As I have noted, the army maintains a clear doctrine that identifies the Israeli occupation entity as the primary enemy, an assessment reiterated in the Lebanese army's official discourse and doctrine today. This stance, notably, is precisely what draws criticism and pressure upon the army from the Americans and others. In reality, internal strife is an externally driven project. Its success is not inevitable. The sound and responsible choice, therefore, is to rally around the Lebanese army. The resistance has long upheld and continues to uphold the slogan, Army, People, Resistance. I firmly believe that refraining from burdening the army with politically motivated vindictive tasks is fundamental. Preserving stability through a comprehensive national defense strategy is the true solution, lest we drift toward the rule of illusions masquerading as control. Overall, this path would be catastrophic if pursued. Yet I do not believe there is any intention, neither on the part of the resistance nor the army, to go down that road.
الشكل العام هو نموذج كارثي إذا ذهبنا بهذا الاتجاه، لكن أنا لا أعتقد أن هناك نية لا عند المقاومة ولا الجيش في وارد ذلك.
Well, Brigadier General, we have many Western officials, especially in the United States of America, frame resistance as an obstacle to stability. Yet it is Zionist Israel that has been continuously violating literally everything, every international law ever known, even under UN frameworks, it has been violating Lebanon. Based on your experience as a man of military, what has historically restrained escalation in Lebanon? Diplomatic mechanism or deterrence imposed by the resistance? And what changes when deterrence is weakened the way that the likes of Nawaf Islam are speaking at the moment?
لا شك سيدتي الكريمة في التجربة التاريخية القرار 425.
Madam, there is no doubt that historical experience, specifically UN Security Council Resolution 425 of 1978 and Resolution 1701, adopted by the United Nations in 2006, demonstrates that the Security Council was never effective in enforcing such resolutions. At the time, diplomatic mechanisms proved incapable of imposing Resolution 425, which remained unenforced for more than 25 years until liberation was achieved by other means. As for Resolution 1701, we are still suffering from its consequences today. Lebanon moved towards implementing this resolution, yet its implementation ultimately served the interests of the Israeli enemy. The experiences of 2000 and 2006, shaped by the resistance, clearly proved that it was resistance-based deterrence that expelled the Israeli enemy in the year 2000. In 2006, deterrence by fire and deterrence by denial, established and consolidated by the resistance, were what produced a solution and created a state of mutual deterrence. This, in turn, left the Israeli enemy in a position of paralysis, as the saying goes, standing on 1.5 legs. Accordingly, there can be no stability in Lebanon without clear and established balances of power. Diplomatic resolutions are mechanisms that are supposed to act as preventive tools against aggression, or as preemptive measures before events unfold, have simply not existed. Historically, what has restrained escalation has been diplomatic mechanisms, and we are living through this reality today, whether after the cessation of hostilities under Resolution 1701 or under the decision announced on November 27, 2024. Yet to this day, the diplomatic approaches adopted by the Lebanese authorities in all their forms have failed to achieve any of their stated objectives. We continue to repeat the demand for the withdrawal of the Israeli enemy, which has not implemented a single commitment it announced, neither under Resolution 1701 nor under its mechanisms of implementation. The Israeli enemy has instead adopted a new strategy, the systematic refusal to honor or implement any agreement it enters to. Therefore, what historically restrained escalation were not diplomatic mechanisms, but resistance deterrence, which had already proven its effectiveness in 2000 and 2006. Even today, despite the Israeli enemy's ongoing operations, it seeks to circumvent full-scale military confrontation, hiding behind what is known as the campaign between wars. In my view, it remains fearful, at least on a moral and strategic level, of launching a larger war or expanding the current one, and instead seeks to conclude matters without bearing the costs of a direct confrontation. The fundamental issue, however, remains what I have stated, and continue to emphasize. As outlined in the oath of office and reaffirmed in the ministerial statement, Lebanon must adopt a comprehensive national defense strategy. That, ultimately, is the path to salvation.
في البيان الوزاري يجب أن يكون هناك في استراتيجية دفاع وطنية وبالتالي هذا هو الخلاص.
Well, I want to thank you very much, retired Brigadier General Baha Halal, military expert and strategist, for your views about what is really going on the ground with the mechanism and with the words of the Prime Minister. Thank you very much for your time and your contribution to our show. Ladies and gents, stay tuned because next we're going to talk about how the mechanism is empty illusion. For months, international officials have promoted the so-called mechanism as a path to security and economic relief for Lebanon. Yet Zionist violations continue and stability remains elusive. Today, we interrogate whether this process is designed to protect Lebanon or to manage its submission while aggression goes unpunished. More details in the following report. If you are confused as to what is going on in Lebanon, let me explain. The so-called mechanism, that glossy committee of capitals, flags, and photo ops, has been meeting again and again in Naqoura and Beirut, all under the watchful eyes of Zionist Israeli drones and jet fighters violating Lebanese airspace. Politicians and diplomats parade out talking points about stability, economic support, and security reforms. But let's be clear, what this mechanism has achieved, if anything at all, is a mirage. First, on the security front, they convene, they issue communiques, and they tout support for the Lebanese army. But on the ground, Israeli entity violations continue unabated. There is no real ceasefire enforcement, just a diplomatic script that keeps resetting while drones, incursions, and strikes into Lebanese territory happen day after day. Such a ceasefire is as stable as sand in the wind. And here's the heartbreaking paradox. While resistance fighters are targeted and assassinated, while violations continue, the mechanism sits in climate-controlled conference rooms exchanging smiling handshakes. In practice, that means no binding enforcement of a ceasefire, no tangible security guarantee for Lebanese civilians, and no serious curtailment of Israeli entity aggression. Then there's the economic narrative. Officials grandstand about economic cooperation, development, and institutional reforms. But this rhetoric has no constitutional basis when it is linked to conditions that jeopardize Lebanon's sovereignty. It is meaningless air, disconnected from reality. An economy cannot be rebuilt when a foreign army constantly violates borders, when the Lebanese state cannot ensure security, and when the political class uses economic talk as a smokescreen for surrender. This for sure does not seem one bit about rebuilding Lebanon. It's about laundering political concessions through economic language and plastering over strategic failures with jargon. The Lebanese people know this well. The mechanism outcomes so far are essentially zero. No security, no enforceable ceasefire, no real economic program tied to sovereignty. And what of resistance, you may ask? The resistance is not a convention-centered talking point. It is the only real deterrent that has consistently imposed the cost on aggression and preserved Lebanon's dignity. Any attempt by politicians or by delusional advisors to alienate the resistance or subordinate it to foreign agendas will not go unanswered. Those tectonic plates beneath Lebanon are not stable. Push too hard, ignore the realities on the ground, and you will see a pushback like this country has never seen before. One rooted not in wishful diplomacy, but in the real will of the Lebanese people to defend their sovereignty. To discuss this issue with us from Beirut is Mr. Saleh Abu Azzi, political commentator. It's a pleasure having you with us, Mr. Saleh. Now, Western audiences often hear that a ceasefire actually exists in Lebanon. But from a political and legal perspective, what does a ceasefire mean if one side violates it daily without consequences? And how does selective enforcement undermine both international law and also Lebanon's sovereignty?
نعم يعني في البداية دائما ما يركز دوليا.
Yes, at the outset, international discourse and international law have long emphasized that state actors are presumed to be more committed and compliant than non-state actors, such as parties, movements, or organizations. Yet the 27 November 2024 agreement presents a striking reversal of this assumption. In this agreement, brokered with the understanding that the party required to abide by a ceasefire was, in practical terms, the resistance in Lebanon represented by Hezbollah, we find that the non-state actor adhered to the agreement with literal and full commitment. By contrast, the international actor recognized as supposedly a state, the Israeli entity, failed to comply with its obligations. This reality effectively gives rise to a new theory of international compliance. The non-state actors may, in practice, prove more committed to international agreements than state actors. This inversion exists because of the conduct of the Israeli entity itself. The Israeli entity, which is consistently treated as being above international laws, has repeatedly demonstrated contempt for its legal obligations. One need only recall how its representative at the United Nations, before the entire world and without the slightest sense of shame, fed the UN Charter and foundational documents into a paper shredder, symbolically tearing international law apart in plain view of the global community. From another angle, I believe the Israeli entity, faced with growing international momentum, particularly popular and civil pressure framing it as a terrorist entity and a sponsor of terrorism due to its genocidal actions in the Gaza Strip, as well as its killing and wounding of more than 20,000 Lebanese martyrs and injured through its direct war on Lebanon, has sought to manufacture an image of restraint. It attempts to project the illusion of a ceasefire, an end to massacres, and a halt to genocide. In practice, however, it is the Israeli entity itself that violates the agreement in Gaza, and it is the Israeli entity that violates the agreement in Lebanon as well. The gap between image and reality could not be more stark.
التي تخرق الاتفاق في قطاع غزة هي التي تخرق الاتفاق في لبنان أيضا.
Well, why is economic assistance within the mechanism repeatedly introduced alongside security arrangements in Lebanon? I mean, shouldn't there be security first and then we talk about economics? And how does tying economic relief to strategic concessions transform the development talk into just political pressure tool rather than a genuine recovery plan for Lebanon and the Lebanese?
نعم يعني إذا عدنا إلى المرجعية القانونية للميكانيزم سنجد بأن هنالك مرجعيتين أساسيتين.
Yes, if we return to the legal reference framework of this linkage, we find that there are two principal foundations. The first relates to the agreement on the cessation of hostilities in November 2024 and to International Resolution 1701. These two legal references constitute security frameworks aimed at preserving the existing order, preserving the commitments of all security actors with regard to weapons, withdrawals, and the safeguarding of borders. Within the Mechanism Committee, the Lebanese side has carried out everything required to implement these agreements, while the Israeli entity continues to violate them. At present, and in light of developments in its defensive posture, the Israeli entity has effectively established 3 lines of defense. The first line lies within the Zionist entity itself. The second consists of buffer zones established in Syria and Lebanon, in addition to the Gaza Strip. What is unfolding at this stage, these extensive violations, is part of the consolidation of a buffer zone, accompanied by the destruction of approximately 27 or 28 Lebanese border villages. Now, what is the United States doing? It argues that instead of labeling this area a buffer zone, it can be reframed as an economic option through development projects in the region. In practical terms, this area functions as a buffer zone for the Israeli entity, while from the Lebanese side it is presented as an economic zone. But where do the legal problems lie? First and foremost, this approach fails to respect the personal rights that must be safeguarded for individuals, families, and Lebanese households in these towns. In effect, the United States has attempted to cloak the buffer zone in an economic guise, while in reality this constitutes an act of occupation of the border strip. That is one dimension. Another dimension is that the United States is actively working to empower the Israeli entity in the region. This determined effort, particularly under the Trump administration, rests on the belief that there are 2 gateways to peace. The first is peace through force, which is being applied in Gaza in practice, and in Lebanon and in Syria, as well as through the push toward a security agreement. In this model, the values of rights and justice for peoples recede in favor of American pressure and American arrogance. The second gateway is normalization through the economic door. These 2 gateways are intended to enable the Israeli entity to dominate the region's resources and peoples, and to monopolize the economy, security, and political decision-making in favor of Tel Aviv. Accordingly, the current focus, whether within the Lebanese internal arena or within the Mechanism Committee, is on a military security track to which Lebanon is expected to adhere, while the Israeli entity does not. Simultaneously, there is a political-economic track that forms part of the normalization gateway between Beirut and Tel Aviv, or at least, this is how it is being designed to appear.
وعلى مسار اقتصادي سياسي هو جزء من بوابة التطبيع ما بين بيروت وتل أبيب أو هكذا يراد لها.
Well, if international actors, Mr. Saleh, continue to marginalize the resistance while failing to restrain Israeli aggression, as you just mentioned, what political and social shifts should Western policymakers realistically expect inside Lebanon, and why might those shifts produce outcomes far more destabilizing than what we're seeing as status quo?
نعم، يعني مبدأ السلام بالقوة الذي ينتهجه ترامب.
Yes, Trump's doctrine of peace through force, for which the Israeli entity serves as one of the principal instruments in the region, ultimately reveals a deeper reality. For quite some time now, the Israeli entity has appeared as little more than an executive arm of the United States and its regional projects, a vision of peace that is inseparable from the subjugation of peoples and the humiliation of their dignity, stripping them of their humanity. Such a model will inevitably push these societies toward a path entirely different from the one imposed upon them. In other words, if the strategy of humiliation, manifested through the Israeli entity's persistent refusal to honor the agreements it signs, is assumed to lead resistance environments, or the Lebanese people or the Palestinian people as a whole, towards submission, passivity, and silence, then this is a profound illusion, one disproven repeatedly by history. Every previous attempt to eradicate resistance movements in Palestine only gave rise to new forms of resistance. Today, Lebanese society as a whole, across all sects, and particularly the resistance's social base in Lebanon, is demanding that the resistance respond to the violations committed by the Israeli entity. In essence, if the Israeli entity's objective behind these operations, targeting civilians, military personnel, and both civilian and military infrastructure in Lebanon, is to impose conditions of submission, then it has clearly failed. These societies have not entered a state of acquiescence. Quite the opposite. As part of a broader state of social mobilization, they have become even more hawkish than the resistance itself. The resistance in Lebanon and Palestine operates with rational leadership, guided by careful cost-benefit calculations and by considerations centered on protecting the land, the people, and human life. It is precisely the human dimension, the desire to avoid war and to spare societies the heavy costs imposed by Israeli entity criminality, that tempers its decisions. Yet it is often the people themselves who come to demand responses to Israeli entity violations. Thus, we return once again to the same conclusion. It is the conduct of the Israeli entity and the policies of the United States in the region that drive peoples towards harsher and more confrontational choices. Choices born directly from the Israeli entity's persistent refusal to abide by agreements and by the most basic norms of international conduct.
تدفع الشعوب إلى خيارات عنفية جراء عدم التزام إسرائيل.
Definitely, I hear you out loud, and I think the Lebanese people are ready also to put their plan into work if this continues, especially this kind of provocation continues. I want to thank you very much, Mr. Saleh Abu Azzi, political commentator, for joining us to talk about this specific matter in Lebanon. Ladies and gents, thank you for watching. Please do follow us on Telegram and on X to get more updates about the region of West Asia right here on Press TV's The Mideaststream. Assalamu alaikum.